Let me know like when it's time to start.
All right, I think I'll just, Yasmin, I think we're still waiting for a couple of journalists to join, but I think we can already start and they'll join us along the way. So, dear colleagues, dear members of the press, thank you for joining us for this post-2021 ReSAKSS virtual press conference. My name is Layi Butaki and I'm Director of Communication and Outreach for Academia 2063. Academia 2063, in partnership with the African Union Commission, organized a 3-day virtual press conference, with high-level partners from the academic and international development sectors to debate on the findings of the recently published 2021 ReSAKSS Annual Trends and Outlook Report, to provide evidence-based data on building resilient African food systems after COVID-19. Just to give you a quick rundown of the agenda of this virtual press conference, we will listen to Dr. Ousmane Badiane, who is Academia 2063's Executive Chairperson. He will deliver a statement on Academia 2063's mission, ReSAKSS impact, and the key takeaways for the 2021 ReSAKSS. Then we'll listen to Dr. Eliane Obalijoro, who is the Executive Director of Sustainability in the Digital Age and Global Hub Director of Canada for the Future, and co-editor of the 2021 ATOR, who will share key findings from the report. And then we'll listen to Dr. Marco De Rico, who is an economist at FAO. And then we'll have closing remarks from Dr. Augustin Wambo. So without further ado, I'll hand over to Dr. Ousmane Badiane.
Thank you, Lai, and welcome to friends from the media who are joining us here today. And also thank you to my colleagues around the table for joining us for this press conference. Everybody around the table has made a major contribution to this year's conference in the ATOR, which is led every year by the team at Academia 2063. So let me just say a couple of words. Academia 2063 is a Pan-African research organization with headquarters in Kigali, Rwanda, and a regional office in Dakar. As our motto says, we're trying to mobilize, enhance, create, and deploy African expertise to support African development efforts around the agenda of the African Union, the Agenda 2063, and more specifically, agendas around agriculture, trade, and as they unfold, the parts of the broader Agenda 2063. We think and believe that economic policy making is a daily business. So high quality expertise at arm's length that is available and accessible is needed and is critical to ensuring that decisions and policies and strategies that are implemented are done so based on solid evidence that is relevant and that is locally meaningful. So that is our broader agenda, and that is our mission to make sure that all member states of the African Union have access to this expertise that allow them to get the best policies with the most impactful outcomes with regards to all the different target groups of the agenda. We are deploying 3 main programs at the continental level with many more at the country level. And one of those 3 continental programs is the Regional Strategic Analysis and Knowledge Support Systems, which has been started nearly 20 years ago and is the main platform for data analytics to support review, benchmarking, and mutual learning around the African Union agenda. For the last 10 and 12 years, I would say, actually going 15 years now, every year we issue the annual Trends and Outlook Report, which is the official monitoring and evaluation report of the African Malabo Declaration agenda. And every year we choose a specific topic that is of strategic importance to the African agenda. This year it was rebuilding after COVID. We assemble top experts across the globe who serve as editors and equally leading experts who contribute to the reports. The reports also take stock of the progress made in terms of implementing the African agenda and progress on the ground by all different member states. The report is released every year at a conference co-hosted by the African Union Commission in charge of agriculture. And this year it took place earlier this week. We have been honored to have among the editors Dr. Balijiro, who is here with us, who's going to give you some highlights. We also have been very lucky to have contributors such as Marco De Rico from FAO here. I will hand over the floor now to Lai and welcome you again to this press conference and look forward to a very lively debate with you. Thank you very much, and back to you, Dr. Butai.
Thank you very much, Dr. Badian, for those opening remarks. Before I introduce our next speaker, I would like to acknowledge our colleague from Academia 2063, Ms. Julie Collins, who is Senior Associate Scientist at the organization. Next up, we'll hear from Dr. Eliane Ubalijoro, the Executive Director of Sustainability in the Digital Age and Global Hub Director of Canada for the Future. She is also a co-editor of the 2021 Annual Trends and Outlook Report, and she will be sharing an overview of the key findings from this report and what they mean for African food systems. Dr. Ubalijoro.
Thank you. Thank you. So it's a real pleasure for me to be here. So in terms of the findings that we have, I'm very excited to really have an amazing group of people led by a lot of Africans to do this work. And being from Rwanda, I have a special place for Academia 2063, given that the headquarters are in Kigali. So in terms of the work we did in the 2021 report, one of the major findings was that the assessment of the impact of COVID-19 on African countries, really we wanted to focus on food systems and looking at access to inputs to household consumptions. So overall, African governments responded quickly to limit the spread of COVID-19. They imposed lockdowns and sanitary measures that combated disease. However, these actions, among other factors, may have contributed to Africa's relatively low death rates from the pandemic. But at the same time, what is important to realize is that what was found is that nearly all African countries scaled up social protection programs in response to the crisis. However, coverage remains lower in Africa than other parts of the world. But the good news is coverage in sub-Saharan Africa did increase by 3% compared to pre-pandemic levels. Looking at the policy interventions to stop the spread of the pandemic and contain its negative impact on food systems across the continent, COVID-19 demonstrated the need to extend commitment on resilience. We needed to extend focus beyond preparedness to present and future climate variabilities and shocks. And really, we need to continue to focus efforts to include other risks and shocks. And what we also saw is that short, medium, and long-term impacts each require specific attention, and more research will be needed to support how these specific levels of impacts need to be addressed from a policy point of view. Focus on food systems value chains as well as ecosystem service that build resilience to shocks needs to continue to be central to the work ahead. And attention to the macro and micro level can really reveal discrepancies in who was most vulnerable based on socioeconomic disparities. And this focus is really critical in terms of ensuring that we leave nobody behind and that the most vulnerable get needed care and protection as soon as possible. Highlights in terms of innovations in measurement need to be better understood, and their effects on the pandemic and the factors contributing to resilience. What we know is that remote sensing and machine learning for food crop production data in Africa post-COVID-19 needs to be harnessed to ensure high quality data can be used to enhance resilience and do it in ways that are transparent, that are fastly available for policymakers to ensure agility in making needed decisions. Measurement approaches for a health system sensitive resilience index are critical to ensure agile responses to global health shocks. And this really pointed to the importance of having ministries of health and ministries of agriculture work closely together. Because what was found was that measuring resilience capacities through the integration of macro level and micro level indicators show that there's a really strong interaction in terms of when we have strong health systems, they help protect against food insecurity. Methods of assessment of the impact of COVID-19 on community dietary patterns are critical to behavioral change and new communication strategies. And with the data that was shared from the FAO chief economist, it's clear that if we want to protect Africa from non-communicable diseases, it's really critical that these dietary patterns are monitored to ensure that as we build African capacity at all levels of science, policy, economic growth, that we also want to make sure that livelihoods and lifelong health is there with us. And so how we pay to these dietary patterns is really critical and needs to be paired with a climate resilient African nutritious foods that really ensure that we're looking at African neglected crops that are climate resilient in our diets to really strengthen our immune system and our capacity to fight pandemics and other events and shocks that can come as we move forward. We know that a consumer-focused nexus framework is needed to drive assessment of value chain performance, and that how we allow flow of goods across Africa is critical. In terms of the tracking of progress towards the Comprehensive Africa Agriculture Development Program, what Tefera Collins and Macombo stated in the 2021 report is that policies to promote cross-border trade are important to ensure consumers access to food and producers access to inputs, as well as broad markets. In addition to trade facilitation efforts, these policies should include initiatives that improve the quality and completeness of trade data, including informal trade that was very affected in the early parts of the pandemic. In order to allow countries to better monitor the effects of crises, trade, and identify means to mitigate negative impacts. What we know is that an important positive development during COVID-19 was the launch of the trading under the African Continental Free Trade Area Agreement, launched on January 1st, 2021. So this free trade agreement really, its implementation will be more and more critical in terms of accelerating to measure that its potential benefits in terms of increased incomes and food security by allowing circulations of goods across Africa and to contribute to Africa's recovery from the effects of the pandemic. What we know is that countries that had diversified agricultural crops were able to have more resilience than those that didn't. And the border closings were very, very critical to countries that really imported a significant amount of their food crops. So how Africa trades in the future will correlate with Africa's capacity for resilience to shocks such as the future pandemics. And in conclusion, what we know is that it is really urgent that evidence-based strategies that ensure stable food and nutrition security and support economic growth across the continent include these three things. First, enhancing social protection programs, ensuring the functioning of markets effectively, and developing a more comprehensive indicator framework aided by deployment of new measurement methodologies that link health to food systems and the adoption of more ecologically viable agricultural production practices. We know that agriculture represents one of the major sources of greenhouse gas emissions in Africa, and regenerative practices can not only help reverse that, but really create regenerative systems that allow us to have more resilient crop production systems. So as we connect those to digitalization, we can really ensure a flow of goods and people across the continent to ensure a resilient food secure and nutrition secure continent. But at the same time, we also need to keep investing in social protection programs. And as we understand the market dynamics and develop a more comprehensive data strategy, we know that these are really critical first steps for future action that should be taken. And I think for all of us, for the contributors to the 2021 ATOR, it's really about how can the work we do be of service to policymakers in Africa to strengthen the work they do, the dedication they have to our people, and ensuring that we prepare for future generations to be more resilient and face a world that will continue to face climate change, as well as will be vulnerable to future pandemics. And we hope the work we've done will inform decision-making to make Africa more resilient. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Ubalijo, for providing that overview of the 2021 ATOR. Now we'll hear from Dr. Marco De Rico, economist at the United Nations Food and Agriculture Organization. He is a contributing author for Chapter 11 of the Annual Trends and Outlook report. Dr. Marco De Rico will speak about food security resilience in crisis context. Dr. Rico, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much. I hope you can hear me because the connection is a bit unstable. So I will try to keep my video on. Then in case I ask you kindly to let me know if the connection breaks so that I can turn off the video. Can you hear me? Yes, I see.
Great, we hear you now. Perfect.
Okay, perfect. Thank you so much. Sorry for this. So thank you for inviting me here. I'm very pleased. I've been collaborating in this since long at this point, and I'm very, very, very happy to be part of this discussion. And again, thank you for inviting. So let me just start. Conflict is one of the key drivers of severe food crisis and recently re-emerged famines. The number of conflict is increasing, exacerbated by climatic-related shocks. There are lasting development costs and consequences for societies, for people, for livelihoods that experience conflict and violence and other fragile situations. Countries experiencing acute food insecurity require urgent humanitarian assistance, both food and non-food. Three of the major drivers behind the recent changes in food security and nutrition identified in the past editions of the State of Food and Insecurity report of FAO are conflict, climate variability and extremes, and economic slowdowns and downturns, which are exacerbated by the underlying causes of poverty and very high and persistent level of inequality. FAO lists approximately 45 countries in crisis requiring external assistance for food. And now, you know, I'm FAO, so I like numbers, and that's what I'm giving out in this moment. So it is projected that between 720 and 811 million people in the world faced hunger in 2020, which is pretty much an increase of 118 million people. So we're talking about impressive number. And now let's look at what is even more impressive in terms of number. There is a significant improvement in the condition and in life of kids, of children. And when I was preparing this statement, I Googled a lot of the UNICEF website and the statistics, which I'm now therefore acknowledging. And there is a significant improvement. 1 in 7 children died before arriving the age of 5 in 2019, which is a significant improvement if compared with what happened in 1990, where 1 in 11 children died before reaching age of 5. However, if we look at numbers in terms of children dying per year, it's complicated even to read those numbers. And per day, we are talking about 14,000 children under age dying every day in 2019. In general, international organizations assume that development aid mitigates violence, food insecurity, and help building resilience, which is something needed, therefore, to try and address and improve those numbers that I just mentioned. Therefore, substantial foreign aid is allocated to countries that are affected by those type of threats that I just mentioned. In countries experience fragility, the delivery of public services such as security, social protection, I heard Dr. Eliane mentioning social protection, education, healthcare, clean water, energy, waste management, and basic stuff like education for our kids, well, I already mentioned, sorry, is often inhibited by conflict, weak capacity within institutions, and insufficient infrastructure. Of course, ongoing conflicts, the risk of a return of conflict, and a high level of insecurity make the implementation of programs like social protection programs, humanitarian and development interventions more difficult and more challenging. Of course, one of my biggest hat working with our chief economist is as an impact evaluation, and therefore I must say that robust data sets and rigorous impact evaluation of fragile contexts or in crisis countries are quite rare. This is, I think, an important period by this point of view, because in a sort of dichotomy between the purists in academicians working on the impact evaluation and therefore pushing for the golden standard of impact evaluation, the randomized control trials, and people like us working in the field and therefore knowing how limited is the capacity to implement a randomized control trial. This seems to be a period where also journals and very high-level journals are pushing for obtaining evidence, data-driven evidence from the field on experiments in impact evaluation, even if it is not perfectly randomized, which is to me a significant, important aspect to be mentioned. In the last few years, and I like to mark this starting in pretty much in 2005, with a seminal paper by Jackie Sutton, Prabhu Pingali, of course, and Luca Linovi, resilience emerged like a concept that can inform both humanitarian and development interventions to support the coping with shocks, stressors, and try to limit the negative effect and consequences of the crisis. I like to remind the definition of resilience, which is a capacity to absorb, adapt, and transform, but especially to try to avoid that stressors and shocks have a negative long-term consequences on people, basically. Unfortunately, there is still few to new evidence to show if this resilience-oriented framework and projects and investments that are made is effectively helping people getting out of poverty or becoming more resilient, more capable of surviving to shocks. In particular, UN and non-UN international implementers are many times left alone with no or scarce solid evidence on whether these interventions that are setting up are effective or not. Therefore, as I was mentioning before, accepting evidence from quasi-experimental design become important and become fundamental for the achievement of greater evidence. This is one of the reasons.
So do you want to wrap up so the others also can have some time before, and the journalists?
Sure. Sorry.
Thank you.
Just to wrap up, I think that what is really important is to make sure that the resilience is included in the impact evaluation, in the provision of valid, solid impact evaluations, and especially with the lens to food system resilience and to household resilience, which are two aspects of resilience that can be well combined to try to provide evidence of what we are doing in the field and if the money we're spending is effectively spent. Sorry for taking longer, Usman.
All right, no problem, no worries.
Thank you.
Mille grazie.
Dr. Marco De Rico for that presentation. And now, before we proceed to the Q&A session, we will listen to Dr. Augustin Wambo-Yemjo. He is the Principal Program Officer, Agricultural Policy and Investment Financing at the African Union Development Agency, NEPAD. Dr. Wambo-Yemjo, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Lai. I'm privileged to be giving this closing statement after a very busy 3-day ReSAKSS conference, which in my view and understanding is one of the most well-packaged conference I've ever seen in the context of CADEP when it comes to how professional this has been organized, the depth of the discussions and the type of topics that were covered. I'm personally happy to be given this opportunity because that is an occasion to share two important historic elements in my understanding of what the journey so far has been. From the start of this adventure, I think there was a lot of dedication from the part of Dr. Badian to ensure that we don't just, as we were trying to translate the Maputo decision into a concrete set of implementable actions on the ground, we could not afford to take evidence or capacity required to drive such an ambitious agenda for granted. It was important from that standpoint to make sure that we have in place what was required for Africa to be able to position and to be likely to succeed in achieving the set targets. One thing I'm also seeing that is my view is a major improvement is the importance of focusing on measurement. Whether you consider what Dr. Rico just presented or what Dr. Elian introduced, I think measuring what is happening is very critical, and how you measure that and how that impacts what's going on is equally important. So my personal take on the journey so far is that if I recall very well, in 2018, the ReSAKSS conference held in Addis focused on social protection. When you look at how this one is coming and how this one is adding value in a particular context of COVID, I'm very happy to see that we are making some very good progress, because back then, handling the issue of social protection wasn't, for those who attended that particular conference, they could see between that one and this one how much progress has been made. And I think this is for the good of the cause that we are trying to promote. I'm happy that we have come this far. Now, from the very good intentions and proposals and comment that came from the various plenary sessions and discussions, I believe that we are in a better position to appreciate what it means to really rely on data, to rely on evidence, to be able to advise on the core set of actions that would need to address such a complex issue, such complex issues that we're facing, especially these have been magnified by the COVID pandemic. But I'm confident, looking at the energy that's behind academia, that the continent will have the quantum of knowledge put together to inform its action towards reversing the loss of productivity, the loss of resilience, and so on and so forth that the continent has been able to achieve thus far, and which is suffering some setback from the pandemic. To really conclude, I would say that we now know what the agenda is, we know what the challenge is. We probably have better refined tools today than yesterday to do the work. It is about time to walk the talk and really deliver quality. Quality is something that I heard Dr. Usman Badian stress many times, including over the past 3 days. So thank you very much for this opportunity. I'm very happy to be part of this conversation. I look forward to the questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Wambo Yamjer, for your concluding remarks. And now we will take a couple of questions from our colleagues from the press. If you have a question, please tell us your name and the media outlet you represent. You can raise your hand and we will give you the floor. I think I saw a hand raised during the presentations. I believe that was Maya Hautefeuille. Maya, would you like to ask a question? If yes, please just raise your hand and you will be given the floor. Meanwhile, we have a Q&A chat box here. At any time, you can submit your questions through the chat box if you prefer. So while waiting for the journalists to share their questions, I would like to ask, and any member of the panelists can pick this up, how important is stakeholder engagement, partnership for the goals, in turning this evidence-based research into policies and eventually scaling to drive agricultural development and to improve African food systems transformation? Dr. Abalijero, would you like to go first?
Yes. So stakeholder engagement is a really critical part in terms of ensuring that we find out who are the most marginalized and what are their needs. It's also important to understand across the system and across income levels, what are the challenges and opportunities to support the different types of households, the different types of contributions to formal versus informal economy, and also barriers to trade. And so consultations of stakeholders is really central to being able to have agile policies that really ensure we leave nobody behind and that we have adequate provisions for every type of stakeholder in terms of supporting them, especially through shocks.
Thank you, Dr. Balijaro. Dr. Rico, Dr. Badian, would you like to weigh in on the same question on the issue of stakeholder engagement to drive implementation and scaling?
Yeah, thanks so much.
Go ahead, Marco, I'll come after you. No, go ahead, please. Por favor. Please go ahead.
Thanks, Usman. Grazie. So I can't agree more with what Dr. Eliana just mentioned. I mean, the involvement and to make sure that we have different stakeholders involved, the coordination of the actions, the coordinations of the mechanism, response mechanism, and the coordination of the different actors are fundamental. I think we all can do so much better if we avoid the duplication and overlapping, so we just coordinate better our efforts.
Now, I'll just add that public policy is nothing but a catalyst factor to enable economic agents, households, enterprises, traders, and others to do what is best for the common good. Therefore, the action resides somewhere else outside of the policy. And for the action or the actions to converge, there ought to be an understanding of the incentives, the interests, and the constraints of different groups of actors. So therefore, stakeholder engagement allows the policymaker to understand the different drivers of the different actors whose actions he or she would like to see converge to deliver what is best. So without that kind of stakeholder engagement, the chances of success are less. And without that kind of stakeholder engagement, the opportunity to get a feedback, to correct, to redirect, and to measure and aim and get better outcomes, those chances are also less. So stakeholder engagement, no matter what public policy you're talking about, is critical and very important. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Badian. I would like, while waiting for any questions from the press, I would like equally for us to address the gender component. We have seen disruptions caused by the COVID-19 pandemic. We've seen that a lot of farmers, rural farmers, mostly rural women, took a serious hit as a result of the crisis, border closures, inability to export, to go to the market. How has the gender lens been incorporated into the various research findings, and how will these resources eventually trickle down to the actors, the agricultural sector, basically the farmers, how will all of those policies trickle down to them to improve their own livelihoods? Again, for all the panelists.
I'm happy to start. So female smallholder farmers in Africa present the majority of workers. And what we know is that the digital divide affects women and girls at a higher rate. And so what we realized during the pandemic is that access to digital tools, to be able to have access to inputs, to monitor crop growth, to look at water levels and look at how remote sensing can ensure that the proper amendments were done. Women are at a disadvantage because women have less access to the digital tools needed. And so, and also in terms of value chain logistics, this is also a space that this divide also showed the great weakness of having this divide present. And so I think what's really important is how do we empower women across value chains in terms of access to digital tools, not only to increase and improve and stabilize their production, but also access to markets, access to finance, and really ensure that their work across the value chains are not inhibited by the types of shocks that we saw. And we also know that for girls, they were more affected in terms of access to school. So there's been setbacks in terms of girls' education during COVID-19, so the potential for their future contributions. So I think this really points again to the importance of how do we ensure that digital tools do not scale the digital divide, and how do we address access to digital tools, connectivity for women and girls across Africa, given the critical role they play in terms of not only food security, but also household nutrition. And so again, into the space of behavioral change, women play a critical role in terms of what is on the plate of each person in the family. So it's very critical at all levels that women be consulted to ensure that not only at the food security, but at the nutrition level, that they play a key role in understanding what is happening. And also going back to the issue around stakeholder engagement, we need to ensure that there is no fragmentation of the data that is needed so that we can make agile policymaking benefit all, and especially women and girls.
Thank you, Dr. Obalijoro. So we have a couple of questions. We have one from Aobe Prosper from Le Journal Africa in Burundi. And he's asking, selon vous, quels sont les premiers pays qui nécessitent rapidement l'assistance des bailleurs de fonds? In other words, which countries do you feel quickly need funding to be able to drive this transformation? I don't know if Dr. Marco De Rico would like to take a shot at that one. Perhaps we'll equally hear from Dr. Badian.
Sure, thank you. That's a very important question. I think that there are countries which definitely need funds, and there are countries that need better use of funds. But that said, the funds, of course, there are a number of countries which are considering in protected crisis or food crisis countries, and those are the countries that are requiring more urgently the humanitarian interventions. And I'm thinking, of course, to different countries which are under the lens of the international assistance. So Somalia, South Sudan, I can mention many more, Yemen, I can mention DRC, I can mention many countries which are in a very complicated situation so far. And again, I think it's important to think both on the perspective of humanitarian interventions, and we also need to think of the development interventions to grant a long-term and more sustainable intervention. Otherwise, we can fix an immediate need, but then we will fall back in the same situation in the coming years.
And just to add to that, peut-être je vais le dire en français parce que notre collègue posait sa question en français et du Burundi. J'allais dire que la majorité des pays africains ont pu, avec la contribution, bien sûr, de la communauté internationale, faire face à la crise en termes de protection sociale, en termes de filets sociaux. Et je me rappelle bien que M. Cham du Sénégal nous a rappelé durant la conférence que les pays avaient en fait suffisamment de moyens pour pouvoir réagir rapidement en temps de crise. C'était peut-être les mécanismes et l'infrastructure institutionnelle qui manquaient pour le faire, et surtout le fait que les pays ne soient pas préparés à ce genre de crise. Là où il faudrait l'appui de la communauté internationale, c'est dans le renforcement de la résilience et la diversification des activités économiques dans les différents pays. La continuation des efforts qui ont pu assurer la relance économique en Afrique depuis 2000. On voit qu'il y a quelque part un essoufflement en termes du niveau d'investissement. Pour la première fois, après 20 ans de croissance continue, l'Afrique a connu un taux de croissance négatif en 2020 à cause de la crise. Ce qu'il faudrait maintenant, c'est réinjecter les investissements qu'il faut, améliorer et renforcer les réformes politiques qui ont été prises par les pays depuis 2000 et continuer à renforcer cette relance économique pour remettre les économies africaines sur les rails. C'est là où il faudra, je pense, une contribution importante de la communauté internationale. La COVID est une crise qui illustre le type de crise auquel nous allons faire face dans les décennies à venir. Donc, ce qui est ressorti de Glasgow, COP26, les engagements qui ont été pris là-bas, mais également les engagements au niveau du Fonds monétaire international pour les droits de tirage spéciaux, ces montants devraient pouvoir permettre à la communauté internationale d'investir davantage et de travailler ensemble avec les pays africains pour mieux asseoir la relance économique et renforcer la résilience des économies africaines. C'est plutôt dans le sens du futur, de ce qu'il faut faire, qu'on doit comprendre l'apport que la communauté internationale a apporté, mais également les efforts que les pays africains ont à consentir. Il y a des moyens de faire mieux avec ce qui est disponible à l'intérieur avant de faire appel à l'aide internationale qui est effectivement une condition sine qua non de l'accélération du développement économique en Afrique. Mais on peut faire mieux avec ce que nous avons et je pense qu'il y a une obligation de la communauté internationale dans l'après-Glasgow, COP26, mais aussi avec les mesures prises par le Fonds monétaire international de mieux d'injecter davantage de ressources en Afrique pour appuyer les économies africaines. Merci.
Merci beaucoup, Dr. Badian, pour cette intervention. We have another one from Ms. Aissa Touba. I think this is for Dr. Badian, and I believe Dr. Wamboyamji can equally weigh in from the EU perspective. How does the 2021 ReSAKSS conference and the 2021 ATOR tie in with the recent launch of Academia 2063's 5-year strategy to improve African economies?
I can start, and I'm sure Dr. Yamjo can contribute to that as well. The conference and the report are the illustration of what Academia 2063 is trying to achieve, which is to bring data and analytics to guide and inform policy and strategies across the continent to increase the chances of more impactful policies and programs. So the content of the ATOR, he looked at how do you rebuild after COVID, which has been a major shock globally. So the data that's been presented in the ATOR, the analysis, the evidence across the globe by top leading experts has put on the table lessons learned through the crisis, its recommendations, how to respond to it, and to be better future crises of this nature. So the 8 or therefore in the conference are just right there in the middle of our vision to mobilize African expertise to meet the needs of African member states, members of the African Union. So let me stop here, and if Dr. Yamjo wanted to contribute to that, thank you.
Thank you very much. I think the question is a very important one. Building on what you just said, Dr. Badian, you mentioned the data and the knowledge that is needed, but I will spend a bit more time on the need for action. Now that we are aware of the direction that we should be taking if we want to build resilient food systems, now that we are aware of the resources that are required for us to create the quantum of impact that is needed on the ground to transform the situation, I think it's for us for the next 5 years to focus more on getting things done on the ground, getting people involved, getting the stakeholders, as mentioned in another question, involved, targeting the most critical stakeholders like youth and women, for them to be in a position to get their fair role in the key value chains. The value chains are where you really have an opportunity to transparently create the value and redistribute that value in a way that each and every player can get his or her fair share. My understanding is that the 5 next years are very critical if we want to, by 2030 or even by 2025, to see a completely different picture of what the food security and nutrition security on the continent looks like. The conference, as mentioned, has provided very high level quality data, has pointed to some very interesting work stream that concerted effort. Academia 2063 alone will not be able to achieve. Academia will probably do facilitation, but all the key players across the continent and the globe who have direct interest in seeing a better continent will probably have to wait for us to be able to transform and build our food systems in a sustainable manner. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Wambo Yamjo. We are drawing near to the end of this press conference. And before we close out, as Dr. Badian has emphasized, that the post-2021 ReSAKSS conference agenda is upon us. Now it's time for implementation. I would like each panelist just to tell us in a few words what needs to happen next. What needs to happen next? We have seen the data, we have seen the evidence-based research. The stakeholders have renewed their commitment to working together to support the transformation of African food systems. What needs to happen next, in your opinion? What are the 3 key things that need to happen next to move this agenda forward?
So I'd like to start. Oh, go ahead.
Go ahead, Elian. I'll come after you. Go ahead.
Yeah, I think one of the urgent things we realize is the need for data-driven decision-making. And this has to be critical across enhancing social protection programs, ensuring the functioning of markets, as well as developing a more comprehensive indicator framework that allows us also to take in charge mitigation of climate change and align with the decade of ecosystem restoration. Those have to be central to how we move forward, and only doing those will allow us to bring the level of food security and nutrition we need on the continent.
Thank you.
Excellent.
Dr. Marco De Rico, you want to weigh in on that?
Yeah, thanks. I totally support what Dr. Elian, sorry for this, just mentioned, and I would say that what is needed next is a greater coordination for stakeholders, as Dr. Elian said, greater data evidence on what we are doing and how we are spending our money. people's money, and most likely mobilizing more resources for countries which are more in need and to send them exactly in the areas that are needed.
Thank you. Dr. Yamja?
Yes, thank you. I'm of the view that we will need to look back into how we've been performing thus far when it comes to our ability to put at the disposal of the people who use the data to inform their actions. It's probably wiser in my understanding going forward that we look into how effective this support has been, because we really need to have a deliberate and more ambitious retailing effort to make sure that if it's even required, we may get to the level of hand-holding. I think that will require resources, both financial and human, but more importantly, partnership and coordination and alignment, because we have a lot of ongoing initiatives out there that are kind of not well coordinated. If this could be a contribution into improving that coordination, I think that would be a very good way forward. Thank you.
Dr. Badian?
I was going to say that building on what Elian Marco and Augustin have said, thank you. It is preparedness for responding, for preparedness and responsiveness to face similar shocks in the future. COVID is just a sign of things to come. We need to understand the nature of vulnerability, what is driving vulnerability at the community and household level, who is exposed to shocks and how much, and what are the contributors to their resilience so we can build the resilience before these shocks come. That we invest in the institutional infrastructure to respond if those shocks do come. We need to start now to make those investments after that. So the data, the analytics, the institutional framework, the regulatory framework, the policies need to be brought together right now so that we can respond to these shocks. They'll be coming at us, and maybe as fierce as COVID and perhaps more frequent than in the past. So these ought to be a priority for African countries. Social protection is, I think, the poor child in the house of public policies in Africa. We have not scaled up social protection and made it a mainstream policy. We have that in projects, we have that in small, tiny pilots here or there. And this is an area where we need to invest so that as African countries grow, everybody's crowded in and nobody is left behind. And that is not only going to improve livelihoods across our country, but it's going to make us also more resilient to future shocks because people have some assets to build on, but also because we have the mechanisms, we have the policies, we have the infrastructure, we have the evidence to respond when the next shock hits. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Badian. We had the last one, but I believe it has been addressed in your closing remarks. It has to do with ensuring sustainability, and I believe that all the speakers have addressed that. We have a few minutes left. What do policymakers need to do going forward to ensure sustainability? If anyone has any last thoughts on that, you can jump in. Dr. Badian, do you want to say a few words on that?
Well, sustainability is first and foremost making sure that the progress of the last 20 years is continued in the future. That the resources that allowed us to grow at a faster pace are used efficiently and are used in a way that makes them sustainable and available to future generations. So sustainability is, at the end of the day, a mindset in the way we do policy. But the real driver of sustainability is really science and technology. It is how you find ways of getting more out of every piece of resources you have. What we want driving growth in our countries is to increase the productivity of the resources that poor people depend on. That is agricultural land, this agricultural labor, and that is the manpower in the informal sector. How do you deploy technologies from biotechnology for better seeds, seeds that are drought tolerant, because we're looking at climate variability and droughts more recurrent, seeds that are nutrient efficient, nitrogen, so you don't have to pour a lot of fertilizers while you're growing. Seeds that are salt tolerant, that where you have arid zones and marginal zones, people can grow instead of encroaching in forest areas and new lands. Seeds that are pest and disease tolerant, so that with the changing climate, invasive species cannot destroy our crops. But also you need technologies that allow the informal sector to access knowledge and finance and financial services like insurance to be able to innovate. Dr. Belligero was just talking about digital services. So it is mastering science and technology. So we cannot be sustainable as economists if we don't invest in the laboratories and the expertise and the infrastructure that make modern science accessible to African countries. We need to harness those digital emerging molecular biology and all the sciences, biosciences that are available to us to deal with the changing climate and to continue to grow with the smallest footprints that is possible. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Badian. And we just had a last message from Dr. Obalijoro, who had to leave. And she says how we work collectively together to help Africa achieve the SDGs has to be aided by the digital age and governance that is responsible for 21st century problems. Regenerative agriculture and artificial intelligence can work together to improve productivity. And that just dovetails with what Dr. Badian was saying about having the digital infrastructure accessible in African countries to ascertain sustainability. That brings us to the end of this virtual press conference. Thank you so much. If we'll just turn on your videos for a few seconds so we can get some shots from the video. Thank you, dear members of the press, for joining us for this post-event virtual press conference. If you monitor the chat box, you have received a couple of links to the 2021 ATOR, to 2021 ATOR and all of our resources, our press releases, and the website. You have my media contact details in the media advisory should you need any additional information. Thank you to all our speakers, Dr. Marco De Rico, Dr. Wambo Yamje, Dr. Obalijoro, and our executive chair, Dr. Badian. Thank you all for joining us and have an excellent day.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thank you.